Welcome back. In this video, we will take a closer look at the V Cinema series Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi, which means scary stories that really happened. As mentioned at the end of the previous video, this V Cinema series had a huge impact on Japanese horror and is even regarded as one of the forerunners of what would soon be known as J-horror. However, before we talk about this V Cinema series from 1991, I should explain that Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi didn't even start with that. Originally, it was a manga magazine founded by Asahi Sonorama, a past publishing division of one of Japan's biggest newspapers, the Asahi Shimbun. The first volume appeared in 1987, 4 years prior to the V Cinema series, as a special issue of Asahi Sonorama's horror manga magazine Halloween, which is just Japanese for Halloween. The basic concept of this Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi manga magazine was simple. They would take scary stories from people who claimed to have actually experienced these events in real life and then turn them into short comics. And that is quite interesting, because it's certainly not the first time in the history of Japanese literature that allegedly true accounts of mysterious or scary events were collected and published. Just think back to Fudoki, which could contain uncanny accounts of strange creatures or places. See chapter 2.1. Setsuwa, see chapter 2.1 as well. Sokoku Banashi, see chapter 2.4.1. Or the kaidan subgenre Jitsuwa Kaidan, which refers specifically to kaidan that claim to be accounts of true events. See chapter 2.1 for a brief mention of Jitsuwa Kaidan and chapter 2.4.1 for kaidan in general. That's not to say, of course, that the creators of the Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi manga magazine necessarily knew all of these genres when they created it, but at the very least it goes to show that no matter the century, supposedly true, mysterious or scary tales have always been quite effective and popular. Okay, now let's move on to the actual V Cinema version of Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi, or simply Honkowa, which is a popular way to abbreviate the name of the series. The basic concept was the same as that of the earlier manga magazines, only this time it wasn't comics, but short films that depicted recreations of scary events that allegedly happened to someone in real life. First off, here are some more details about the V Cinema series itself. As mentioned before, the first installment of these Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi short film collections was released in 1991 as part of Studio Toei's direct-to-video V Cinema series. It was created by director Tsuruta Norio, who came up with a first pitch of the project. Some may actually know him as the director of movies like Ring Zero Birthday from 2000, a prequel to the Japanese The Ring film, or the 2004 J-horror film Premonition. And then, when the project was greenlit, Konaka Chiaki was added to it as scriptwriter. Some may know him as the head writer of the anime Serial Experiments Lain. Apart from the first installment, Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi from 1991, there were two more V Cinema releases of Honkowa. Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi Dainiya, a translation would be Scary Stories That Really Happened the Second Evening. This one was also released in 1991. And Shin Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi Yugen Kai, which might perhaps best be translated as New Scary True Stories from the Spirit Realm. This one was released in 1992. The series was praised for its often subtle and uncanny style that heavily relied on atmosphere and the fear of the unknown, instead of frequent jump scares or explicit gore. This probably made it stand out all the more at the time, especially when you consider that it was a direct-to-video release and many of the horror-related direct-to-video productions that had come before this series had been explicit splatter films, as mentioned in the previous video. Now, I would like to give you a few concrete examples here and highlight 3 short films from the V Cinema Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi series that are said to have been particularly influential. Number 1. Rei no Ugomeku Ie. A rough translation would be The House That Is Crawling with Ghosts. This was the second short film from Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi Dainiya, the second Honkowa installment from 1991. In this story, a family is forced to move from Tokyo to Yamaguchi due to the father's job. However, while the father is barely in the house because of his work, the mother and daughter soon notice that something is very wrong with their new home. From the 3 examples, this is probably the darkest and most uncanny one, and also the one that most clearly shows why Tsuruta Norio's Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi is often considered a forerunner of J-horror movies. The atmosphere is extremely oppressive right from the very beginning, and this heavy feeling doesn't let up throughout the entire episode. But see for yourself, here is how it starts.
れが新しい王子だ。
This might just be me, but I think the entire way the house is presented to the viewer is very uncanny. Perhaps it's the juxtaposition of the object that is shown and the way it is presented. We are shown something that should be one of the safest places in our life, but it is presented through unsettling camera angles, the colors feel all wrong, and everything is accompanied by an unnerving drone of ambient music and wind. It's also an interesting choice that throughout the entire short film there are occasional paragraphs of text adding details to the story, such as the one you saw at the end there, adding to the feeling that we are witnessing the account of someone who actually experienced all this. Visually, there's a certain darkness and surreality to it all that makes it abundantly clear that we should not consider this a nice and cozy home. And the fact that the ominous ambient music never disappears for long greatly contributes to the constant sense of uneasiness that permeates this short film. Take a look at this scene, for instance, shortly after they entered the house.
これ何？
ああ、前に住んでた人がここに仏壇を置いてたんだよ。陽子、ウォッチルームだっただろ。犬飼の子でも飼うか。
ちょっと、そんなに長くここにいるわけじゃないでしょ。次に越した先で飼えなかったら陽子が泣くわ。
先を読みすぎなんだよお前は。なあ陽子。
ママ。
Everything just looks so gloomy and colorless in this house, and even when they're talking about getting a pet, something that is quite a nice topic, the ominous music doesn't change. And then, when something finally does happen, it is not presented with a bang or with sudden cuts, loud screams, jump scare noises, people frantically fleeing or anything of the sort. Instead, it happens slowly, quietly, creeping under your skin. Another example. This begins with the daughter probably on her way to school and practicing how to introduce herself there.
宗岡陽子です。はじめまして。
This subtle invasion of the family's everyday life by forces of the unknown, even in broad daylight, is another aspect of this short film that feels very unnerving and uncanny in my opinion. These are places that should be familiar to them, places where they should take safety and normalcy for granted, but instead they all get defiled by the unknown. Eventually, the father, who doesn't quite believe in what his wife and daughter are telling him, reluctantly agrees to have a medium come over and try to exorcise whatever spirits may roam in the house. Yet, the short film stays true to its formula and does not turn into an action-packed exorcism scene. Again, there are no jump scares, no one is getting possessed or attacked. Instead, there's just a feeling of uneasiness yet again that pervades the whole scene, especially when the daughter begins to see a creepy figure outside slowly shaking its head, almost as if it was telling her that trying to exorcise them is a futile endeavor. Okay, with that, I will conclude the first example and move on to example number 2, Natsu no Taikukan. A rough translation would be The Gym During Summer. This was the first short film in Honto ni atta Kawaii Hanashi Dai Niya, the second V Cinema Honko installment released in 1991. In this story, three girls visit their school's gym at night to see if they can witness any ghosts. Overall, this short film is not as gloomy as the first example, but it has its fair share of atmospheric and creepy moments. Note, for example, how it makes clever use of a first-person perspective shot coupled with a flashlight to create immersion and give the viewer a glimpse into what it might feel like to be there in person. Like this. Or this. The highlight of this short film, however, is clearly the way it depicts the appearance of an actual ghost towards the end. At this point, the group has had a little fight and split up. One of the three girls is alone in a room and, of course, it's her who gets visited by an apparition. Note how the scene focuses on slowly building up tension while showing very little of the actual ghost, leaving a lot to the viewer's imagination. The whole scene has something dreamlike, albeit in a very nightmarish way, perhaps comparable to sleep paralysis, and it can feel oddly terrifying even though not much happens. Of course, some may prefer horror with more tempo and action and might not be into scenes like this at all, and that's fine too. Everyone is susceptible to different kinds of horror, and there shouldn't be just one correct way of doing horror. Nonetheless, these were some novel ideas when it came to the question on how to portray ghosts in horror films. Ideas that would go on to inspire later directors of Japanese horror. For example, it is said that this particular scene strongly inspired director Kurosawa Kiyoshi's depiction of ghosts in the horror movies that he created 10 to 15 years later. I will talk a lot more about Kurosawa Kiyoshi in another video, but for now allow me to show you a brief scene from Kurosawa Kiyoshi's movie Kairo from 2001, which seems to have been directly influenced by this ghost from Honkawa. That's pretty terrifying. And now on to the third example, Odoriba no Tomodachi, which translates to The Friend on the Stairs. This was the second short film in Shin Honto Niatta Kowai Hanashi Yugenkai, the third V Cinema Honkawa installment from 1992. Among these three examples, this one might be the least creepy short film overall, but it is of great significance nonetheless, for it is said that later J-horror movie director Shimizu Takashi was so fond of one of its scenes that he actually asked V-Cinema Honkoa director Tsuruta Norio if he could mimic it in his film The Grudge, which was a Western-oriented remake of his own film Ju-On. First, here is the scene from Honkoa's Odoriba no Tomodachi from 1992. Next, take a look at this scene. Now, the only sources I could find for the claim that Shimizu Takashi asked Tsuruta Norio for permission and, with his blessing, copied this scene in The Grudge were Japanese Wikipedia articles on Tsuruta Norio, one of which states that Tsuruta Norio himself supposedly mentioned this during a lecture at the Wako University. However, I do find the story quite plausible given the extreme similarity between both scenes. This concludes all the examples from Tsuruta Norio's Honto ni Atta Kowai Hanashi v Cinema series that I wanted to show you, but I hope these clips were able to give you an idea as to why the series is regarded as a major influence on the later genre of J-horror movies. Now, back then, apart from laying the groundwork for later J-horror movies, Honto ni Atta Kowai Hanashi is also said to have contributed to a general rise in popularity of such supposedly true scary or mysterious stories. In particular, the following two genres are said to have experienced a boom, that of Jitsuwa Kaidan and horror-related Toshi Densetsu. Jitsuwa Kaidan have been mentioned just a while ago, but to reiterate, they are kaidan that explicitly claim to be accounts of true experiences, and it actually makes a lot of sense that the success of Honkoa made these more popular, because if you think about it, the Honkoa mangas and short films themselves are pretty much Jitsuwa Kaidan, since they present scary stories and claim that these were reenactments of events that people actually experienced. So, if Honkoa was well received, then it's certainly no surprise that that success led to an increased popularity of Jitsuwa Kaidan. As for Toshi Densetsu, this term refers to urban legends. In fact, it is a direct translation of the English term, with Toshi meaning city or urban and Densetsu meaning legend or legends. American folklorist Jan Harold Brunvand popularized this term in the 1980s with his book The Vanishing Hitchhiker from 1981. This book dealt with American urban legends, and in it he explains,
urban legends are realistic stories concerning recent events or alleged events with an ironic or supernatural twist. The storytellers assume that the true facts of each case lie just one or two informants back down the line with a reliable witness or in a news media report.
In a later work, he also defines the term as follows.
Urban legends are true stories that are too good to be true. These popular fables describe presumably real, though odd, events that happened to a friend of a friend. The settings and actions in urban legends are realistic and familiar: homes, offices, hotels, shopping malls, freeways, etc. And the human characters in urban legends are quite ordinary people. However, the bizarre, comic, or horrifying incidents that occur to these people go one step too far to be believable.
Speaking of Brunvand and his first book on urban legends, The Vanishing Hitchhiker was actually another likely contributor to the increased popularity of supposedly true scary stories in Japan, because this book was translated into Japanese and published in Japan in 1988 under the name Kieru Hitchhiker, and this translated version caused a first boom of Toshi Densetsu compilations in Japan upon its publication in 1988. It was, by the way, also the translation in this book that coined the Japanese term Toshi Densetsu and made it immensely popular in Japan. Now, since we're already talking about books, it was also around this time that a certain Japanese novel appeared, namely Ringu, or Ring, a horror novel from 1991, written by Suzuki Koji, in which a cursed video causes anyone who watches it to die exactly 7 days later unless they copy the tape and show it to someone else, thus spreading the curse like a virus. With regards to this, I would like to briefly touch upon the phenomenon of Fuko no Tegami. In English, we know them as chain letters. The Japanese term could be translated as letters of misfortune. These were letters, often from an unknown sender, that would urge the recipient to forward the letter to a certain number of people within a certain time frame, or else some terrible misfortune would befall them. In Japan, this phenomenon is thought to have started spreading in the 1960s and 1970s and took on such massive proportions that it was even picked up by the media. And with new technologies appearing, such as fax machines or the internet, it kept on finding new ways of spreading. With this in mind, it's quite possible to think of the cursed video in Ringu that will kill you unless you copy it and show it to someone else as a clever twist on the Foucault no Tegami chain letter phenomenon. As for the aforementioned rising popularity of Jitsuwa Kaidan and urban legends, the book Ringu was published in 1991, so it's hard to tell how much of it was already influenced by Jitsuwa Kaidan and urban legends. But the later 1998 film adaptation, on the other hand, is a different story. This one, in my opinion, shows some clear influences from the aforementioned rise of urban legends and Jitsuwa Kaidan. For example, in the book Ringu from 1991, the protagonist, who is a reporter, simply finds the cursed video after launching an investigation into the death of 4 teenagers. But in the later film adaptation from 1998, the cursed videotape is actually introduced as an urban legend that circulates among teenagers. The movie even pretty much starts with 2 teenagers talking about this urban legend, and the tape is then eventually found by the main protagonist when she begins to investigate this urban legend. Furthermore, in the book, nothing happens after the protagonist has watched the video, apart from the fact that he feels very distressed by it, but in the 1998 film adaptation, people always receive a strange phone call right afterwards. Now, you may be wondering what is so interesting about the fact that the film added a supernatural phone call. Well, one popular theme in urban legends and supposedly true kaidan ever since the introduction of telephones to Japan is that of stories about receiving phone calls from the world of the dead. And so, the phone call in the 1998 film adaptation of Ringu fits right into this pattern. A later example that falls into the same category, by the way, would be the Chakushin Ari series from 2003 and onwards, in which a cell phone call from the future predicts people's death. So, to summarize once more, after the gore-heavy 1980s, Japanese horror cinema in the 1990s seemed to turn more towards atmospheric horror, with the V-Cinema series Honto ni Atta Kowai Hanashi from 1991 and 1992 basically laying the groundwork for what would soon turn into the genre of J-horror. Instead of the preceding plethora of splatter movies, this series did away with extreme gore, violent murders, dismemberment, and shocking visuals, and instead focused on things like atmosphere, psychological tension, paranormal elements, etc. The concept of the series was actually based on an earlier manga magazine of the same name, with both the manga and the V-Cinema series showing short stories and claiming that they were based on true experiences. In this regard, both are said to have contributed to an increased popularity of allegedly true kaidan and urban legends in the following years, a development that had probably also been helped along by the publication in 1988 of the Japanese translation of Jan Harald Brunwald's 1981 book on urban legends called The Vanishing Hitchhiker. This publication had actually caused a first boom of urban legend compilations in Japan after its release. And while I can't say for sure to what extent the book Ringu that appeared in 1991 was influenced by all these developments, I would argue that the 1998 film adaptation of it is a good example of a Japanese horror movie that was influenced both by the atmospheric style of the Honto ni Atta Kowai Hanashi short films and by the increased popularity of urban legends and Jitsuwa Kaidan. It also is a great example of further developments with regards to the motif of female vengeful spirits, but that is a topic for the next video, in which we will finally talk about J-horror movies in more detail and examine how the motif of female vengeful spirits reached new heights through them. I hope to see you then, and as always, take care and goodbye.